Who are the Los Angeles Kings going to go after in free agency, and why is it probably not going to be Filip Forsberg? We're going to talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Los Angeles Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everyone, happy Monday. You're listening to Locked On Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you all your favorite news about your favorite hockey team on your favorite podcasting app of choice. My name is Sarah, host of your show. As always, super excited to be here with you talking about the Kings. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it is where the game starts. The game starts for the Los Angeles Kings basically now. The season is essentially over-ish. As I'm recording this, the Stanley Cup Final is being played. The Avalanche are very close to capturing the whole thing. The season will be over officially. I guess it depends. I feel like there's always a debate of, do you count the draft as the end of one season or the beginning of the next season? But regardless, season's almost over. Kings need to start looking towards next season. We've already talked about the couple of moves that they have made in terms of re-signing some players, giving TJ Tynan, Jacob Movrare new deals. They've got a lot of other restricted free agents who are going to be looking for deals as well. Plus the fact that, they've got some cap space. They've got some extra money. They have spots on their roster to fill, or they have players that they can trade. There's a lot of things the Kings can do to kind of help them get over the hump, let's say. There was a tweet that went around, I think it was in the round where the Avalanche basically just destroyed Edmonton. It was either that game or it was the game that the Avalanche just stomped all over Tampa. One of those games. But regardless, there was a tweet that basically said something to the effect of, a bunch of teams are sitting back watching this game and realizing, oh, we're not just one or two guys away. And I feel like that's, to anyone who had thought, oh, the Kings are just one or two guys away. Have you watched this playoff series? Have you watched the Stanley Cup Final? Have you watched Colorado just steamroll people? No, the Kings are not just one or two guys away. So we're not quite in that area where we're looking for the Justin Williams, I guess, or, that one guy who you feel like is gonna, put the neat bow on everything and give you the last thing you need to kind of get over the hump. The Kings are still in that phase of okay, we can get to the playoffs now. We want to go further. And so there's a lot of things that they can do in terms of looking at free agency, in terms of looking at trades. And so we'll be talking about that on today's show. And to do that, I brought back Eddie Garcia. We had him on the other week. We talked about Dustin Brown. We talked about just the season in general. And so brought Eddie back on the show today to talk about free agency and some players the Kings should look at, some, holes in the lineup that we need to fill, some holes in the lineup that maybe we can wait a little bit on. So we're going to talk about that on today's show. But the real reason, the reason to have Eddie on was because he's great and because he knows a lot of things about hockey and has lots of cool things to say. But the reason that you have gotten to know Eddie and the reason that we're having him back today, and you're going to see him a little bit more over this week and next week, is that I do want to give a little bit of an announcement, I guess, before we get into the things, that next week, I think it's next week, I don't know, sometime in there, is going to be my last show as host of Locked On Kings. It's a great time for the team, for the franchise, to be kind of moving into this next stage of out of the rebuild and into being a team that is going to be competing for a playoff spot and is going to be kind of in the conversation, hopefully for years to come in the NHL, in the Pacific Division, in the West, and kind of decided it was a good time to transition off, to welcome on Eddie, and to hand the reins over to him. And so you're going to have me for another couple weeks. This is basically my 2 weeks notice, it's a job, that we're going to be sort of transitioning things and handing the baton over to Eddie. I'm really excited because I think that he is going to be a really great addition to the Locked On family. I have loved getting to talk with him about the Kings and getting to talk about his background as a hockey fan And I know that he does lots of great work in sports radio, and so he's going to be a great host for you guys to carry on and to go into the next era, I guess, of Locked On Kings time. And so I have been delighted to be with you guys, to be covering the Kings on this show since day one of Locked On Kings time period frame thing. It's a little bit bittersweet because obviously this has been like my baby essentially since day one of Locked On Kings, since our channel network manager Sean Woodley, host of Locked On Raptors, if you like basketball, since Sean approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in taking on the show, and I dived right in. And it's been so much fun. It's been great to get to know you guys, the fans, the listeners, the viewers, whatever you want to think of yourself as. I've made so many great new connections through doing the show, have met so many fans, and have learned so much from you guys about what you're passionate about and what you think the Kings should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And it's been a delight covering the games, introducing prospects to you, and just being there for the past very bizarre seasons of hockey. We had the COVID shortened year. We have the weird year where like nothing, the other COVID year, and then obviously this year the Kings taking that last leap into the playoffs. So it has been such a delight. You guys were all fantastic. I can't wait for you guys to get to know Eddie more and get to hear and learn from him about hockey. I'm sure he's going to have lots of really cool stuff. So like I said, it is bittersweet to step away, but I think that, when it's time, it's time. When it's right, it's the right thing to do. And for you guys, I'm really excited for you to have someone like Eddie to lead the ship as you get into the next era of the Kings. So nothing right now is going to change. You're going to see Eddie a little bit more as we kind of do some shows together, get him in front of you guys a little bit more. And then I believe the 11th, in case you want to like either throw a party or be sad or whatever, I believe the 11th will be my last show before we kick things over officially to Eddie. But we'll more on that. But thanks to all of you who have made this a delight. I'm not going anywhere on Twitter, so you can always find me, at Right Said Sarah on Twitter. And I will still be, talking about the Kings in the Rain in some capacity, just not doing the daily show. But I'm very excited for what's next for me. I don't know what that answer is, but we'll find out. It's probably going to involve a lot of sleeping and posting pictures of my cat. And I'm very excited for what's coming up for you guys with the next era of Locked On Kings. So all of that said, let's talk about free agency. Before we get to that, though, I do have a couple things I want to tell you about, and that is, of course, BetOnline. The hockey season is, as right now, as I'm recording, ticking down. So you probably don't need BetOnline too much for hockey information, but if you're into other sports stuff, well, BetOnline is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, and much more. If you go to their website, it's not just stats, it's not just odds and lines and all that stuff. You can also read a lot of really great articles talking about what's going on with different teams, different players, and kind of helping you make your decisions smartly when you go to betonline.net. It continues to be your best source for all of your sport wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And of course, betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. The next big thing that we get to care about in hockey is free agency, and it seems like maybe the Kings will be active again. Rob Blake kind of swung for the fences a little bit last year with getting Phil Deneau and making some other moves, and so maybe this year the Kings will be doing some other stuff. And so today we are talking with Eddie again, who will be your, as we talked about earlier in the show, be your new voice of Locked On Kings coming up pretty soon. So I'm excited to get you guys a little preview of what Eddie's thoughts and feelings are on the Kings and where they should be going in the future. And figured we'd talk free agency today. So Eddie, thank you for jumping on the show again with me. Glad to have you back and to chat with you about free agency. So I'll just throw it right to you. Looking at the Kings, their roster, where do you think they should go in terms of free agency this summer?
Well, to me, I think that they definitely need to try and find a top line left winger. I know Alex Iafallo, has done a lot of good things in his time with the Kings, but he played pretty much all season with Kopitar and Kempe, and 17 goals and 20 assists is, I don't think, if the Kings want to go to the next level, that's not good enough. He does a lot of good things other than scoring, and I'm not diminishing his, the other things he does away from the ice, but no, I should say away from the puck. But I think they need to upgrade there,
Yeah.
and that might even, is he a trade piece? Possibly. We'll see, but we're just talking free agency. I think there are some really attractive wingers out there that could come in and fill a void. I think right off the top, though, what are we looking at as far as who fits in with the Kings and what they can spend? Of course,
Yeah.
are they in the market for a Johnny Gaudreau or a Filip Forsberg? Probably not. Those are your top end left wingers that are going to be looking to make $10+ million a year. So I don't know that they're in the running for one of those guys. Would they be interested in bringing in an Evander Kane? I personally wouldn't go down that road. I don't know if Rob Blake would. I don't think he would, but that's another guy out there that obviously had a ton of value in Edmonton. We know he's got issues as far as his financial future. I'm sure he's looking to make as much money as he can, understandably so. I mean, every player is to an extent, but his is a specific situation where he has issues off the ice that he has to address as well. So also, do you want to look at, when Dean Lombardi was rebuilding the Kings, he had a specific plan where he talked about growing the team from within, sprinkling in some additions here and there. And once he felt they were a step away, go out and try and get those big free agent final pieces. So are the Kings there yet? I don't think so. I think they're still in the second floor phase of the house that they're putting together. They're not quite ready to put the roof on yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's, Rob Blake, I think when he added Philip Deneau, Victor Arvidsson, those were guys that were not just there to help now, but to also be there in the immediate future as well. So we're not looking to go out and get maybe a veteran guy on the last legs who could be the missing piece. So what type of players are they looking for? In unrestricted free agency, I think there are certainly some very attractive players out there. David Perron is a very interesting guy for me in St. Louis. He's a little bit older, but if you saw him play with the Blues this year, a guy who brings a lot of production and also a lot of grit. He goes to those dirty areas. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty. He's a guy I think is very intriguing. I don't know if they would be in the market for an older guy like a Claude Giroux. Or Patrice Bergeron certainly has said he's either going to Boston or he's not going to play anywhere else. If you've been watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, a couple of Colorado Avalanche wingers are showing their value. Valeri Nichushkin has been unbelievable for the Avs. He's been a guy, though, who, he had his time in Dallas and he was a pretty big bust. And now he's found a home in Colorado. I wonder if he's telling his agent, get me the most you can, but I really want to stay here. My career is taking off here. Andrei Burakovsky, who the Avs picked up from Washington, he's another guy who's an unrestricted free agent. He's done some nice things for them. Maybe he would be attractive. Andre Palat for Tampa has been playing on their top line. He's going to look to get a pretty big payday.
Yeah.
His numbers aren't, astounding, but when you see what he does in the playoffs, and he's been such a money player, that's the guy you're looking to not only to contribute in the regular season, but also in the postseason. Also, for restricted free agents, Andrew Mangiapane is a really attractive player with Calgary. There's no way they're going to be able to sign Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk and him.
Yeah.
So he's a guy who's going to be available. You talked about Kevin Fiala in Minnesota on a previous episode. I think he's a guy also who's very attractive. I'm not sure what Vancouver's plans are with Brock Besser as well, but there are a lot of really attractive free agent wingers out there that I think the Kings are going to be interested in. I assume that that's their biggest area of need. Would you agree with that? That bringing in another high-scoring winger is what they're looking to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I put my Rob Blake hat on, that's kind of the first thing that I'm looking for is, the blue line. It is what it is, especially in the playoffs when everyone was hurt. It's really hard to get an idea of what the Kings defense really looks like and really can do, because we spent so much of the season with not the full complement of guys. So I know that there's a lot of urge to go out and look at defense and look at, everyone talks about like Jake Chitrin and everything and who can you bring in. And I think that's definitely a worthy conversation. But at the end of the day, you don't win games if you don't score more goals than the other team. And they're getting there. I think they really missed Victor Arvidsson big time in the playoffs. I think they didn't realize how much they were going to miss him until he was out. And I think that, I think where you started off at looking at that top line, yeah, they need someone. We saw what happened with Adrian Kempe, putting him next to Anze Kopitar, and like suddenly Adrian Kempe scored 1 million goals, which is great. Now let's do it for the other wing. Alex Iafallo, like you said, he's great, but I think he's your middle six guy. I think that he's the guy who you put on your second, your third line to make life difficult for the other team, for the coach to figure out who to match people up against. And then, you get a guy who can score on that top line. I think that they have the cap space. Yeah, they don't have the $10 million cap space to go. And as much as we'd love, Filip Forsberg, that'd be awesome. But, you get one Filip Forsberg and then nobody else. And then the rest of your team is like AHL guys.
I think if they're going to go out and get a real top line forward, probably would have to be a trade where we got pieces going out and somebody coming in. And that's for another episode. We're just focusing on the for the free agents right now. But yeah, I mean, Alex Iafallo would be a phenomenal third line winger. Yeah. The second line seems to be set, right? Mm-hmm. With Danault and hopefully a healthy Arvidsson and Trevor Moore, which was, as I'm sure you've talked about, probably their best line. Really, I know it was the second line, but I mean, they were probably the best line that they had on the team. Alex would be an unbelievable third line winger. I think he's been given enough of a chance. I know some people maybe speculated, is he healthy? Is he playing with an injury? I mean, he played 79 games. So he played a full season, most of it on the top line. And I'm not saying he's not a player that can be very valuable, but I just don't see him. If we're going to go to the next level, take another step, I think they need to upgrade that top line and give another scoring threat that teams have to deal with Kempe and with Kopitar.
Yeah. I liked it. Like one of the names you mentioned, David Perron. I know that everything kind of indicates that to the extent he can come to an agreement with St. Louis, he wants to stay there, whatever. But that's very intriguing to me, largely because we know how much he and Jonathan Quick hate each other. Like it's hilarious watching Blues games because they're always up in each other's faces. He's absolutely one of those players who you're like, I hate this guy, but if he's on your team, one of the things that people always talk about, with the Kings is, do they need to be tougher? Sure, they had Brendan Lemieux, but he was Brendan Lemieux, the biggest noise he made was biting a guy. They haven't really replaced Curtis McDermott, who could be, by the time this airs, potentially Stanley Cup champion Curtis McDermott, which is hilarious. But they don't have necessarily that toughness in their roster. And for longtime listeners of the show, like they know, like that's not my favorite thing. I think that you can win. You don't need that element, but as long as the whole league still thinks you need that element, then guess what? So they're missing a guy like David Perron, who is that kind of pest. Another guy who I know is up for free agency, who is A, probably going to want to stay where he is. B, if he doesn't get a huge payday, is Nazem Kadri, who has had a phenomenal season for the Avalanche this year, and really, for the large part, has seemed to learn to play on the right side of the line. Like you're not seeing him make quite as many questionable, dirty things that he did when he was with Toronto. The St. Louis Blues might choose to argue with that, but that's fine. But if you're talking about a guy who can score and who can get in the other team's heads and not afraid to be physical, like he's definitely a guy who I think a lot of teams are going to be, bidding for his services if he chooses not to stay with Colorado.
Yeah, and like you said, we're talking mostly about the forwards because I think it seems we're in agreement that that's their biggest need. But there is an argument to be made, like you said, that they maybe could upgrade on the defensive end. But I just don't think that's the priority right now. I think, like you said, there's so much depth there. And there are some. We'll see what Rob Blake decides to do as far as the veteran defenseman if he wants to bring one of those guys back
Mhm.
to be a depth veteran presence. But I think with Doughty, with Matt Roy, with hopefully a healthy Sean Walker, those are three veteran guys that have been around the block and can be paired up with some of the younger guys and be just fine. So I just think I agree with your sentiment that let's see what we've got there with the younger guys taking a step forward, hopefully with a healthy Drew Doughty and a healthy Sean Walker, and see that would be the maybe next season as far as upgrading from that standpoint. And who knows, maybe there's a trade in the works. I know that, like you said, everyone seems to be buzzing about Jacob Chikrin, and there's so much smoke there. Almost it's hard to believe there might not be a little fire there. But look, I will trust the Hall of Fame defenseman Rob Blake to know that the
Yeah.
blue line is in good hands, and I'm sure he has a clear plan of what he wants to do there.
Yeah, and I think that, A, everyone getting healthy, B, we've already seen Sean Dursey kind of step up and, is a lock essentially to be an NHL regular. Jordan Spence has proven that, I think he needs a little more time, but, he stepped in and looked fine for the most part. He looked like a young guy getting his first taste of the NHL, but, I have no doubt that he's going to make it. Brant Clark is the big unknown in terms of, last year before he, I believe he was sick and missed training camp, but there was already kind of buzz of, if he has a great training camp, do we keep him? And I'm sure that same conversation is happening now of, if he comes in and blows everyone away at training camp, knowing that his options are either stay in the NHL or go back to juniors, is he ready? Could make a big, you know, gonna make Rob Blake's life hard. It's always interesting when a prospect comes
In a
up
good way,
and
though. In a
yeah,
good way.
yeah, yeah. Like you want that problem. Like I loved seeing, both Dursey and Spence kind of come up and be like, yeah, we belong here. And then suddenly it's like, oh, well, look at all these guys we have now. Like, you don't like to think of other players as expendable, but then you kind of start looking at all your prospects and you're like, all right, great. Who can we package for something else now that we know that, these guys are kind of set? So yeah, I mean, looking past free agency, the Kings are kind of getting to a point where they're starting to know what they have in their prospects. They're starting to know who's ready, who's not, and who they have too many of, and who they could possibly, put in a deal for a player like, if they're trading for, say, Calgary for the rights for Andrew Mangiapane, are they going to want a young guy or a pick or something? Like, all right, we've got plenty of those. You can have them.
Right, right. And we're talking about, I think we're talking about adding a frontline forward. We got to remember, we're not just talking 5-on-5 too. The power play obviously
Mhm.
needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
So that's going to help on that side of things as well. The special teams need to improve. Clearly, that's an area that they want to address, and that would also help out on the special teams.
Yeah, I mean, that's, there's, I feel like once you start getting into that category of like scoring wingers, you're pretty much always going to have a guy who, like, once you're looking at that caliber of player, you're like, all right, this guy can also be good on special teams. But yeah, I mean, that has to be something that they're looking at. Well, they're going to have to rearrange their coaching now to find,
Right? For Marco Stone.
right, to put someone else in that role. Are they going to actually use players to their strengths? Are they going to put people in places to actually succeed and do what they're supposed to do on the power play, which was always, I feel like, frustrating to watch, because sometimes you can be like, oh, you should be, why are you there? Why aren't you that way? And they just don't do it. They just don't.
Yeah, I mean, look, the coaching staff obviously knows more about hockey than I do,
Yeah.
but there were a lot of times where it seemed like they didn't have a plan. It seemed
Mhm.
like it was just, we'll just figure it out as we go. And to me, when you're struggling on the power play, I think that's when you go to basics, right? That's when you set someone up for a shot, whether it's Kempe on the wing or maybe a Kaliev on the second unit on the wing, or, get somebody out there who's going to shoot it from straight away and get rebounds. It just seemed like it was a lot of, well, we'll just figure it out once we get out there. Now, I'm not saying
Right.
that's exactly what they were doing, but it felt like that. It didn't seem like there were they were setting up specific areas to attack and having a plan that they were going to run through. It was just like, well, let's see what's open, and if you got a shot, take it, and we'll see what happens. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. If you had like unlimited, if you're Rob Blake and the cap isn't a thing, if you had unlimited dollars to do what you wanted, who would be your like number one? I want this guy in free agency player.
Well, if we're talking UFAs, I guess I would have to go with Johnny Gaudreau. A guy who's dynamic, who
Mhm.
can set up other players, obviously can play on the power play. He had kind of a breakout year. You always wonder about that when it's in a contract year. Same thing with Adrian
Mhm.
Kempe. But hey, motivation comes in different forms, and certainly that's a motivation for a player when he knows that he's going to get a big contract coming up, especially if he can perform. So, yeah, I mean, Filip Forsberg's a very nice player as well. But I think I'd probably have to go Johnny Gaudreau if I could have anybody on my wish list.
Yeah, and I think he kind of fits that like, the like new style of hockey of,
Right.
he's smaller, he's shifty.
Mhm.
The Kings haven't, they've never had an issue with that, at least, in the Rob Blake era. I mean, I know with Dean Lombardi, there was always kind of the like, you can't teach size, like, that trend towards getting larger, like, physical imposing players. But, Rob Blake has certainly not looked away from that and, you know, certainly have, Blake Lizotte is prime example of a lot of teams would have, he went undrafted for a reason.
Right.
A lot of teams would not have wanted to take a chance on a guy, that small, especially in the kind of role that he plays. But the Kings have been like, ah, whatever, you do the job, great.
Yeah,
Um,
it's been one of the things that's changed in hockey that I think I've probably been the most excited about. That it's
mhm,
not, if you it is becoming a smaller man's game, a speed game, a more exciting game, more offensive game. We saw, I mean, this season in the NHL was phenomenal as far as offensive goals scored, and we had a 60 goal scorer and several
mhm,
40 goal scorers. So yeah, that's been something that's been a lot of fun to see, and it's great to see a guy like Blake Lizotte who's has so much heart, so much
mhm.
energy, has a role in the NHL.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he's definitely a player who, last season in the off season when I'm kind of putting together my fantasy roster essentially of the Kings, Blake Lizotte was a player who I was like, I don't know where you fit. Like, is someone going to push you out of this role? And the answer was no. Blake Lizotte was like, nope, this is my job. You're come and get it. And he's been just delightful on that role as, yeah, not your typical fourth line center, but he gets it done. But yeah, I think that, yeah, if the cap went away and Rob Blake would do whatever he wanted, yeah, I'd be like, find Johnny Gaudreau's agent, go call him. Um, just such a, like you said, dynamic, fun player. Seems to have a good attitude about it. I know that there's always a lot of talk about like, you know, Calgary. Like, does he want to stay? Like, he's been very clear about like, yeah, I would love to stay in Calgary, but I think they all know it's a business.
Right.
They don't always get a lot of say in it.
And he there, I don't know, who knows what's true and what isn't, but he's an American born guy, he's an East Coast guy. There's always been talk he would like to go back to that
Hmm.
part of the country, and I'm sure if he gets the right offer,
Hmm.
he'll probably do it. He's got a good situation in Calgary. I think he'd like to stay there, but he's not he's going to keep his options open. And if he
Yeah.
gets I could definitely see him if he gets a big deal from an East Coast team. I would not be shocked at all if he went east.
Yeah.
And getting him out of Pacific Division wouldn't be bad for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of these guys, like, okay, the Kings can't get Filip Forsberg. Oh, darn. If he wants to go to like Carolina or something, great. Goodbye. Like, go to the other conference. I don't need to see you, you know, 3, 4, 5 times a year, depending on where you end up. Like, no. It's like whenever Vegas, I mean, I was very annoyed about Vegas getting Jack Eichel for several reasons, but largely because I was like, that means the Kings are going to have to play a healthy Jack Eichel like 5 times or whatever. I don't like that. I don't want that.
Understandable.
Yeah, just send him the other direction. Go to the east. Go to the Rangers. I don't care. Like I don't need that. Um looking at the Kings, I mean they don't in terms of guys they need to re-sign or have the option to re-sign who are unrestricted free agents. Really the only guy up front is Andreas Athanasiou, who I'm pretty sure we have seen the last of him in a Kings jersey for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think so. There were times. I mean, what's kept him in the NHL obviously is his speed and his dynamic ability to get behind defenses and put some fear into some defensemen. And there were times when he provided
Hmm.
that. But the consistency is obviously an issue. The things he does other than that are one of the reasons why he's bounced around a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think he'll still land with somebody. Again,
Yeah.
you can't the cliche, you can't teach speed,
Mhm.
and it is a speed game now. So, and I mean, look, his time in LA, I thought he did a lot of good things,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think it's a numbers game. We've got a lot of young guys who can play that role and probably produce the same points and whatnot. But he's not consistent enough. And we saw it, right? He'd come out of the
Mhm.
lineup, then he'd come back in and he'd do great.
Yeah.
And then he would slide back down again, and then he'd come out of the lineup
Yeah.
again. So
Yeah.
he was a fun player to watch, and there were, like I said, there were times when he provided a lot of excitement. But I just think consistency with him. I think you're right. I think he's probably not going to be back next year.
Yeah, and I know there's a couple of teams, I think like Detroit, Arizona, like teams that need to still meet the cap floor even, who I think will be glad to potentially overpay Andre Athanasiou just because they have to pay someone to play for them. And I think that it maybe be a different story. I know he dealt with a lot of injuries last year. COVID happened. It'd be different if maybe he had gotten a chance to be in the lineup every night, but he was in and out so often because of different injuries and stuff that even if he could be a more consistent player, he didn't get a chance to show that. And like you said, there's so many younger players who I think the Kings need to and should be investing more time in and getting them shots in the NHL that, he's just going to be a little bit of the odd man out, but certainly a fun player. I certainly saw him like years ago playing for Detroit and, watched him score ridiculous goal. I'm pretty sure it was a Kings versus Red Wings game. And I was like, who is this guy? And,
Yeah, he's one of those guys. If you just watch the highlights, you're like, this guy
Mhm.
is an all-star.
Yeah.
Problem is, there's more than just
Yeah.
the odd highlight. There's the full game to be played. But
Right.
he is dynamic and he is exciting to watch, and he does have a few big highlight reel goals
Mhm.
throughout the season. But it's the all-around game.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see where he lands. Hopefully, I just want everyone to go to the Eastern Conference, so we don't have to face him going 90 miles an hour in every other game. So that'd be fine. Go to like Carolina or something. It's fine. So yeah, we've got a quick look at some free agents. I think the consensus is we should just get rid of the cap and be able to do whatever we want, and then the Kings would be unbeatable. So that's my suggestion for the league is
I think that would concern me though with the Vegas Golden Knights. I think they might be willing to spend a lot more, get some investors in there. They've got some
get rid of the cap for everyone but them.
Yeah, there you go.
They since they have like decided to not play by rules, then when we change things, they do have to play by rules. Yeah, no, that'd be terrible. We don't need them to have any more any more advantages than they already do. This has been a fun look at what we've got available, who the Kings might be looking at. I think we're in agreement that they need more scoring, and that should come from finally getting Anze Kopitar, someone on his wing who can score, who isn't named Adrian Kempe. We've already figured out he can do it. So we'll see what happens there. Eddie, I'm glad we got to have this conversation today. We'll have you back again more before we formally pass the baton in July. We'll talk maybe trades. We'll see what happens with the Kings coming up as we get ready for the draft and free agency and all that great stuff. In the meantime, before we go, where can people find you online and your work with sports reporting and radio and all that cool stuff?
Well, if you're listening to this and you're in the Los Angeles area, you can hear me overnights on the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm a part of the Ben Maller Show. There's also a kind of a late night East Coast morning drive show I'm on as well. But AM 570 LA Sports here in Los Angeles. You could also listen on the iHeart app. It's a nationwide network, but again, locally, that's our affiliate. I've got the Puck podcast that I do weekly. It's a weekly NHL recap show, and as you can see, you can send me a message at Eddie on Fox on Twitter, and be glad to connect with all the Kings fans out there.
Awesome. And of course, you can find me on Twitter at Right Said Sarah. The show's on Twitter at Locked On LA Kings. So go follow along as we keep you up to date on all the coolest, latest, greatest Kings news that is out there. And of course, you can find this show wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Eddie, for hanging out with me again as we chat Kings. And until next time, this has been Locked On Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.